I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of the Top 10 of the 2010s. And this week we are concluding the Top 10 International Movies of the Decade list with my number one pick, Leviathan. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is break down some of my favorite movies of the decade. Essentially, I give these top 10 lists in different genres, this week being the top 10 international movies. And how the format of the show works is that one week I give my picks from 10 to 7, including some honorable mentions. And then the next week I give my picks from 6 to 2 on that top 10 list. And then finally, my number one pick of that list, a total video on why I think Amy Adams gives an incredible performance in Arrival, or why I think in this case Leviathan is the best international film of the decade. But without further ado, let's just jump into Leviathan.
Человек не виновен, пока не доказано обратное. Будет доказывать. Кому?
А происходит то, что мы с вами возвращаем душу народу.
I believe Leviathan is a singular movie, a movie designed to move you, to cripple you, to anger you, and by the end of it, leave you empty. From the sort of distinctive Russian voice of this decade, Andrei Zvynesev, he's a director who's put out a couple films this decade, but was really sort of the image of Russian filmmaking. And I think that's one element of international film that I enjoy, is that the director oftentimes is associated to the country, and sort of political beliefs oftentimes, if there's sort of a political message through that film, the country and the director become sort of synonymous with each other. So we say someone like Bong Joon-ho with Parasite, commenting on South Korean class disparity, so of course Bong Joon-ho becomes sort of inherently tied with South Korea, or even something like Asghar Farhadi and his films, which almost always take place in Iran. He's an Iranian filmmaker. There's a connection there. So especially for some of these international filmmakers, just getting an interesting look at another country's politics or another country's cultural differences, and some of the comments that they make on their own society, that in a way it's not an international filmmaker trying to do something Hollywood. It's really singular to the country, to the system that they're in, and giving us a glimpse into that system, which is why I think I love movies so much. It's just getting different perspectives and being able to time travel and being able to be put in other people's shoes. International films do a really terrific job at that, and I think in this film here, Leviathan is a singularly Russian film by a Russian filmmaker. A comment on how authoritarian governments control people and leave them sort of empty shells of people with their sort of power and mindless control. How hope can be squandered if not properly controlled, and sort of with abuse of power. And what the film does interesting is that instead of talking about on a large scale and talking about the politics and the inner workings like maybe some American films do, it really sort of boils it down and reduces it to an allegorical kind of a way, by instead looking at local politics, by instead looking at this sort of small insular incident within the larger scope of the world, or even within Russia itself, of this small fishing town. And this family is a struggle to keep their house, a house that's been in their family or the father's family for generations, but the mayor is sort of trying to seize control of it. And what happens next is that he's sort of getting screwed around, and they're not, so that he calls his friend down from Moscow, Russia, to sort of rough them up and sort of try to play their game and get their house back in what should be a very one-sided case. But of course things don't work like that. So the first half plays like this sort of legal thriller, this legal movie, where we're trying to figure out the case, where we're trying to get things on other guys, trying to play a little bit more dirty, trying to understand some of the local power and politics and the situation, while also, of course, understanding the family dynamic, the lawyer and the father's relationship, or assuming sort of a past war relationship. But then as the film progresses and the system of bureaucracy and corruption starts to overcome our protagonists, we see them sort of lose some of their morals, start to lean maybe to blackmail and other sort of games that the mayor has played, and sort of leaning into that corruption. And then sort of where it goes from there, kind of leaving them hopeless, kind of leaving them drearing and sort of a bleak tale. And there is sort of moments of sort of especially dark humor, and particularly with some of the law proceedings. It is mostly a film, particularly when it makes that sort of second half shift into a one that is incredibly bleak. a real scathing portrait of how one event can really change someone's life, and one thing can sort of devolve into many scenarios, and that in many of these legal thrillers is a battle against underdog versus the big dog. But what if the big dog is just too big to put down? And what if it's just a system that is just so over swarming with control and power that it's hard to even get past a little bit of power in it? But see, all of these themes that I'm talking about, of corruption, of religion, which we'll mention a little bit later, of politics, of just hope and bleakness within the sort of insular town, it's all communicated not sort of directly, as in the protagonist tells us to to the audience, or has a direct monologue to the camera. What it does, and what the sort of genius of the film is that it's all communicated clearly and concisely, but not completely directly. That a lot of it is indirect. That a lot of it is using the visual medium of film to portray visual metaphors, to show sort of scenes that allows the audience to sort of pick up and understand some of these themes without it being completely obvious and sort of over-told to us. And I think what that does is it allows the audience to pick it up themselves. That when you're seeing a visual metaphor that sort of hits you over the head, not in terms of it being so obvious, but it being sort of clear enough that you understand without dialogue. And what that is able to do is allow the audience to really understand and feel a great sense of relief and understanding when it gets that visual metaphor. When you see it, and when you see, the picture, the image of the whale carcass lying on the shore, or you see the scene where the law proceedings going on, and the woman speaking without a breath, and sort of the endlessness nature that goes on there, some of the absurdly comic elements of that, and you pick that up as an audience member, and you get that, you feel a greater sense of reward and accomplishment because you understand that sort of visual metaphor, and you understand the themes a little bit better. So it's actually makes the audience member feel better because they're putting it together. It's trusting the audience is smart enough to get it, but also it's allowing us to understand the themes, that it's still a communicative device, that is still something that is able to communicate the themes in I would argue an even clearer way than if he would just tell us, if the main protagonist would just tell us everything he's feeling. It's clear, it's more concise, and more impactful if it's done through this way of audience revelation. Now, you're of course risking the fact that maybe the audience doesn't get it, but I think if you're an attentive viewer, it's hard to miss, and that reward of understanding and putting together some of these pieces can be funny in some scenarios, but also sort of hopeless in others. But combined with that sort of visual attention to detail, the photography is really adding to it because this is such a visually strong movie. The photography is blue and gray, and it's very foggy and very dreary. That there's using great locations. They're sort of on this lake town, but also, or this sort of ocean town, kind of near the water, and we're also in the mountains, so it's sort of a beautiful landscape, but there's very few times of sunshine and of light. It's always dreary, it's always sort of gray and dark, and very few of the lights is able to get past sort of the fog and the dreariness of it. Also, the sort of visual atmosphere and the tone that the film is setting, just purely based on the photography and that connection to the land, is really depressing, but also apt to sort of the tone and some of the bleakness and the hopelessness that these Russian citizens in this sort of small fishing village are encountering, are facing. And like I said at the top of the show, it was a deft decision to take this larger story that I think has clear allegories and metaphors to a larger modern day Russia, or even just larger corruption in politics, maybe worldwide, but it does so by taking it into this small story that we understand. It's a man and his family, and they're trying to keep their house that they're living in, and there's a mayor who's trying to take it over, and we understand sort of the political and the legal battles that are going on here. But of course, it's always that sort of one-step metaphor that the mayor, who is sort of using his power and using his goons and his connections within the city to try to overtake this man's house, can be sort of seen as a large connection. They talk about Putin. There's images of Pussy Riot on the TV, which of course have some more modern-day political implications if you know about some of those external events, which I think adds and colors to the film, if you know a little bit more about world politics and whatnot. But then, of course, even the element of religion, which I have yet to mention, how the mayor is seen as trying to give a more emotional connection to him because he's expressing a lot of his doubts and his fears of trying to take over this man's house, of trying to get reelected, to the priests. And the position that religion has within the film, that The story is very much a story of Job from the Bible, of a man who just is always questioning about why me and why is this stuff happening, but taken to sort of a more modern, dark, kind of almost cynical look, that there are people who are overstepping their sort of authoritarian boundaries, and there's the politics of the mayor expressing his fears and his doubts to the religious priest, almost a Rasputin type kind of a figure, but also sort of the priest giving the sort of answers that the mayor wants to hear, and sort of the reasons why he's given so much control and can see his sort of people as insects, and how he sort of manipulates the Bible in that way. I think there's a sort of a dual sense of deflection going on here, that the priest is not taking any of the sort of blame, because it's saying that, you know, that's the man's choices and that's how he runs his politics, but of course the politician's man is using religion as a reason to why he's doing what he's doing in his way of going about things. So there's an interesting morality thing going on here, where it's not just pure evil and bad. We do look at the evil, we do look at sort of the guy who's abusing his power in this sort of mayor city, and we understand a little bit more about, well, what's his justification, what's his reasoning, and understand sort of how the system and how these things can kind of occur because of that sort of dual deflection of blame, where the religion guy doesn't really see it's his fault, but the priest, but the mayor doesn't really see it's his fault either, and then there's sort of no one's fault, and then, you know, who is to blame at the end of the day. It is bleak, it is unforgiving, but it's poignant, it's clear, it's communicative. The photography is brilliant in terms of its ability to create an atmosphere. Its switch in that second half from a sort of type of legal pace into sort of a dreary kind of spiral about control and loss of it, and loss of purpose, and about the people who are dead, both the ones that are still living and the ones who are physically dead as well. There's a lot to chew on in this film, and when a film has a lot to say but communicated very clearly and communicated impactfully through the visual medium, through this sort of small story, there's all these small little choices made throughout the film that really just blow you away and really just wow you. So by the end of the film, if you really connect to it and you really sort of understand the thing it's trying to make, I think it's a brilliant political film, part social satire, part sort of absurdist comedy, but also part sort of analysis on hope and lack thereof it, and how that sort of can break a man's soul. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video and this list of the top 10 international movies of the decade. Next week, we're going to be looking at the top 10 biopics of the decade. So I'll define what I consider a biopic in next week's episode, and then talk about some of my favorites. Once again, that's going to be a long episode because there's going to be 5 honorable mentions and my picks from 10 to 7. But if you enjoy the video, subscribe to the channel. Make sure to know that on the ones with multiple movies I talk about, there's going to be a description, timestamps in the description, so you can jump around in case of that. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoy the video. I hope you check out Leviathan, and if you do, let me know in the comments down below. That's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.